boss battles. I love them, he loves them, she loves them,
What?
everybody loves them.
We have no friends here.
But seriously, I love boss battles way too much, and that's why I'm here to analyze them in order to tell you which ones are worth facing and which ones are not. From the best of the best to the worst of the worst. My name is Thievius fan, and this is the boss inspection.
On the second episode of the boss inspection, I'm going to talk about a certain boss from the first Sly Cooper game. And it's a musical boss! Oh yes, today I'm going to cover the fight against Mrs. Ruby. And I dance because it's musical and... Why did I do that? It was so cringy. I promise I'm never going to dance on here again.
Oh my, Mrs. Ruby from Sly Cooper and the Thievius Racoonus. This is quite a polarizing boss, since it seems that half of the Sly Cooper franchise loves it, while the other half hates it, and I can easily see why someone would be on either of these sides, so I thought it would be very fun to analyze such a weird battle. Mrs. Ruby is an alligator that is part of the Fiendish Five, the main antagonistic group from the original Sly Cooper game. And while I think that they are some of the more forgettable villain organizations in the franchise, at least Mrs. Ruby stands out from her colleagues. She learned the ways of voodoo ever since she was a little kid. Because of her dark powers, Mrs. Ruby was feared by many and became an outcast. So when she grew up, she decided to use her powers for evil in order to take revenge on the world that rejected her.
So remember kids, if you can't fit anywhere in the world, develop voodoo powers, summon the undead, and take revenge on everybody. Sounds like a good moral to me.
Later, she joined the Fiendish Five, helped kill the Sly's parents, helped stealing the Thievius Racoonus, and finally went to hide in the swamps of High Tea, which is actually one of my favorite levels in the game, even if it has quite a confusing design at times. But hey, at least it's not the Indian jungle of Sly 2. But let's be honest here. While the villains in the Sly Cooper games are colorful and charismatic, and getting to know their past is always very interesting, they don't really stand out for their backstories, but because of their personalities, and especially their boss fights, and Mrs. Ruby has one of the weirdest ones I've ever seen. Like I said before, this is a musical battle. As Sly himself puts it, it's pretty much a voodoo Simon Says. She'll throw different blasts of magic in the form of the buttons in your controller, and the player will have to press the respective button in sync with the music in order to survive. It sounds simple, but as long as you go, Mrs. Ruby will begin combining different button combinations, making everything overall more chaotic and more entertaining. It's safe to say that Mrs. Ruby's musical fight is one of the more creative and unique battles in the franchise, let alone in any game I played. It's just so fun! Too bad that's pretty much it. Indeed, you just press the buttons a few times, hit Mrs. Ruby, and do it again. Rinse and repeat until you finally defeat the giant Voodoo Alligator. It's a real shame because the fight against Mrs. Ruby could have actually been truly something exceptional if it had more to it. What about having some actual fighting like the other bosses instead of just beating her with a few hits? But no, it ended up being a minigame of pressing buttons at the right moment. It's fun and all, yes, but not really mind-blowing, and it had the potential to be. Although, there is something about the battle against Mrs. Ruby that always makes me laugh no matter what. Let me show you.
Can we see that again, please? Okay, maybe most of you don't get this because you don't know Spanish, but it clearly sounds like Sly is saying que puta, which is Spanish for what a whore. And don't say that you don't hear it, because it clearly sounds like Sly is calling Mrs. Ruby a whore in Spanish. I know this is most likely a gigantic coincidence, but my god, it really sounds like he's saying that. I can't help but burst out laughing every time I face Mrs. Ruby because of this. And now you'll never be able to unhear it.
In conclusion, the boss fight against Mrs. Ruby in Sly Cooper 1 can be summed up with one word. Okay, the character is interesting, but not that memorable. The concept is very creative, but not to its full potential. The gameplay is really fun, but way too simplistic. Even if I like this boss fight, I can see why somebody wouldn't. Well, that, and there's also another reason. You see, a lot of the people who I talk to, including these dingus, seem to have played the PS3 version of Sly Cooper and the Thievius Racoonus, featuring the HD collection, and in this version, the music is incredibly desynchronized from the button inputs. In a musical battle, rhythm is the key to success, but if the music is not synced very well, it's going to be a nightmare for the player to time their button presses correctly. No wonder so many people hated this version of Mrs. Ruby's battle. This is awful and makes the fight almost unplayable.
Mrs. Ruby's fight has a very unique and entertaining concept that stands out from the rest. But I can't really put it in that category because the execution leaves a lot to be desired. And even the people who experienced the bad PS3 version may want to label this one as a Killjoy. Overall, I think Mrs. Ruby deserves to be in the fun category. It may be simplistic in some areas, yes, but overall she delivered a very fun and creative battle without being specifically mind-blowing. And I just like it that way, I am not nitpicky.